We're good to go?
Yes.
Thank you, Flora. Thanks everyone for showing up to this experiment we're gonna do here. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about it in a bit. As I was saying, if maybe you joined a bit later, if you could please share in the chat what you're currently working with and what's your experience with Reforestation, just so I get a feeling about the current knowledge we all have here.
List of things to do with variant.
Oh, there's an open mic somewhere.
I will
Oh, got it.
mute folks.
Yeah. So the idea here is to do a 15-minute introduction and give context to you guys about the research, plus the agenda for this meeting. And then for the rest, about like 75 minutes, we exchange about the research. I will give a more detailed agenda in a little bit. So speaking about me, just so you guys know where I come from, I'm from Brazil. I've been in the tech industry for almost like 10 years. I started my career as a software developer. Then after a few years, I migrated into product management by actually co-founding startups. I already had 3 startups, not in the climate space. And after my last one, I really felt like I was learning a lot about how to build companies and products. And I felt I needed to apply this to something more meaningful. So I started researching about different markets. I didn't know anything about climate change at the time, and climate showed up on my list of possibilities. I started like researching about it, and then living as a digital nomad, I was fortunate enough to be able to live in the Amazon for a few weeks, and it was a very touching experience for me in many different levels. And that was the reason that within climate, I decided to focus on forestry, because climate is quite huge, as you guys probably know, like many different possibilities, right? And for the past few months, I've been doing some freelancing in this space, already working with some forestry companies such as Renoster, Maya Climate, Jundu.earth. I'm still looking for a full-time opportunity in product, but that's already giving me enough experience to get my hands dirty. I'm also working with a nonprofit in Brazil on food waste called Infinite, which redirects unsold food grocery stores to nonprofits that prepare a meal for people facing hunger in Brazil. So that's what I'm doing. So why have I started doing this research? So as I was saying, I'm not from this sector. I wanted to learn fast, and the way I thought this could work out, it was like an approach as if I was to co-found another company in the space. So what would I do? So I was trying to map what were the biggest obstacles on forestry specifically. And so one of the goals was for me to learn about it, so it could increase my chances of spending my professional time on it. But also I felt like that I could share that with other people. Also, like doing the research, maybe as things progressed, it wouldn't remain my full-time activity. So I thought it would be great to make this collaborative in a way, but I didn't know at the time exactly what that was going to turn into. And that's when Max comes in, which was already doing a research and had written a great article on reforestation about the size of the opportunity. Max is here. Max, you want to intro yourself, please?
Sure, yeah. So hello, everyone. I'm Max, based in Berlin. I'm a physicist by training. I have kind of had a similar trajectory to André. So I didn't train in forestry previously, but got quite interested in what my contribution could be as an entrepreneur and also as a product manager. So roughly 2 years ago, I started getting into it with the intention of either starting a business or joining a startup. And so after like spending roughly half a year or maybe 9 months studying the space, talking to different people, I decided to put together this article that you see here. I think I can also drop the link in the chat in a bit. And at the time of writing, I was planning to turn this into kind of 2 pieces. So that one part is already out. It's called Reforestation: The Opportunity. Basically looking at what the potential of reforestation looks like, both from a biophysical perspective, but also from a financial perspective, to build a viable business around contributing to reforestation. And then I had planned to write a sequel to that around why it's not yet happening. So why haven't we reforested trillions of trees or hundreds of thousands of hectares? And there's many obstacles to that, and obviously many of the startups that maybe people on the call here are familiar with are already working on some of those things. And I saw a lot of focus going into financing, which obviously is important, but it's not the only element in establishing a successful reforestation project. And so I started working on this concept of the value chain and basically put together different steps that a successful reforestation project would go through. And along the way, I met André, and he carried this work forward. And here we are. I'm excited to get some feedback on how accurate you think that is. And yeah, I'm happy to be part of this now.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Feel free to jump in anytime. Yeah, I really recommend you guys checking out his first article. It's quite interesting. So that's when we decided to join forces and try to make this to work on this together. So what have we done up to this point? So so Max had already structured the reforestation value chain, which I'm gonna share, or most of it. And I was actually at the time investigating pain points and needs, not only on reforestation, but about deforestation as well. So we decided to focus on reforestation first, even though there is a big intersection. And what I did was like speak with many different experts, many different sorts of stakeholders across this value chain, and try to validate the reforestation value chain, but also uncover those hidden needs and pain points. And but this is totally far from like something ready to be published and say, okay, this is final, it's finished. You know, I mean, I don't think that's ever going to be finished. But this is like a totally work in progress. So I think it's important for you guys to know this. But I really felt the need to start sharing this with people. Otherwise, I would be like waiting for the perfect moment, and then that might never come. And then I think it's worth exchanging with other people about it. The intentions of this meeting. So if you have like I see a lot of people were mentioning in the chat that if you have like no experience with reforestation, I hope you get something out of this, get inspired about like what you can do about it, learn a little bit from our research. And if you have some experience, I would love to hear how you can input your learners into this. I'm going to be asking some questions throughout the sharing here, so that's going to be a moment for you guys to for us to exchange. And like I was saying in the beginning, this is an experiment. I want to make this as much as possible less of a presentation and more like an interactive thing, because I'm not necessarily an expert. I have been learning with experts, and so I hope you guys can, even like asking questions throughout, that's quite helpful. And I think this meeting can be successful if we can, at the end of this, like, we can improve on top of this this base of knowledge here. And like I said, you guys learned something. So the agenda first is to share the reforestation value chain. Then we exchange about it. So please, if you guys have any questions while I'm reading through it, write it down, and then when there's the second moment, you guys can ask. Then the idea is to then go into the parts of like talking about the findings. They're all like high level findings, but I think they're quite important. And that's gonna be another moment for us to share and exchange about it. But it's gonna be about for each one that I present, I'm gonna let you guys like comment and ask questions about it. If I know the answer, I'll try to answer, but probably most of them I'll just write it down and try to research about it later. Or if anyone here knows, feel free to jump in. And then there's gonna be a moment to exchange about new inputs, anything you guys have read about, experienced, or anything that wasn't mentioned that you guys want to add, and then we talk about next steps of the research. Sounds good? All right, so reforestation value chain, I'm gonna change here to the Notion file, which is where the research is currently based. So this is totally not a ideal format for a presentation, but I thought it was actually good so you guys can see what's the document looking like. And this is what I'm gonna be sharing when it's at least ready to be shared. So the way Max is structured this is like you have the phases here. So you have the prepare phase, plant and protect, then you have monitor, and then benefits. And then for each one of those phases, we have different steps. So within the prepare phase, we have setting the context, then inception, funding, planning. Then for plant and protect, we have certification, materials, including seeds and saplings, planting, care and protection, management. For monitor, we have ongoing monitoring, reporting and verification. Then for benefits, we have communication, community benefits, payments for ecosystem services, and sale of certificates. Then tasks for each one of those steps. So for context,
maybe André,
yeah.
just to mention a few things in advance before we get into the nitty gritty. So the idea is to open up this document and to make this more of a collaborative approach, not only today but also further on. Because while I found this knowledge not that easy to get by, so there's also obviously a few academic papers that you can read, for example, by Karen Hall. But the purpose of putting everything together in a value chain is to help people who are thinking about where to focus maybe their entrepreneurial energies, to look at different steps. And obviously financing is a part of this, but you'll find it's not the only part. And I think it's also important to caveat this with saying that obviously it's not a linear process. So this is kind of a nice, or it's an attempt to structure something that's obviously a lot more complex and messy in reality. And and obviously the abstractions need to be very specific when you get into a project on the ground. So this is not to be meant as a template of how to do it, but rather as an observation of what many projects shared. And what this also does not include yet is to have a good understanding of what a successful project, what makes a successful project. So all of the success factors. There's some interesting research going into that as well. And so here the naive assumption is basically if you pay attention to all of the steps, then the outcome will be successful. But obviously that's not guaranteed. So yeah, this just as a preface. And maybe André, we should mention at least a few of the people that we spoke to that led to the this collection of insights. So maybe I can start from my end. I was initially starting in Germany, where obviously there's lots of forests, but reforestation is not such a big, or was not such a big topic until recently, and then over the course of this year, I had the good fortune to work with Ecosia. It's a German company, startup, a B Corp, that is providing search engine service and funneling their proceedings to I think by now more than 60 project partners worldwide with tens of thousands of sites. So this is partially where this knowledge stems from, but also this is not officially endorsed by Ecosia, so it's based on my insights, and maybe I can work with Ecosia in the future to bring all of those things together. But at the moment, it's part of the insight comes from there, part of the insights come from my experience speaking to people in Germany. And maybe André, you can also, before we go into the details, share a few of the conversations you had that led to this model.
Yeah, that's great that you added that. For each one of the pain points I'm gonna mention later, there's gonna be reading on the bottom, like what conversations brought that up, or were the main ones at least. But I spoke a lot with Elias from Renoster. He was ex-head of science of Wachama. You guys may know him. He's great. Also, I spoke with Lucas, which I found out to be like a cousin of mine who works at the Reforestation in Brazil for like 20, 30 years with Iniciativa Verde. So actually, like a lot of the findings on my side come from Brazil. Luisa Teixeira, which is also on this call from Planet, we talked before. It was a great conversation. I spoke with Brian from Pachama. I spoke with Morrison from NCX. I spoke also with a professor from the University of Manaus who does research on reforestation for native trees in the Amazon. People from a couple of different nonprofits in Brazil that plants trees as well. There are a few other people, but I'll talk about them when I show the insights. But I think it's important to mention. And also, like, I think that was great that Max added that, because this format here, I just want to emphasize this. This is Prolay, the format we're going to be sharing, opening up to the public. I'm calling this like open sourcing it, importing that from tech in a way that like anyone could input stuff in here. You would go through a review pipeline process, but something quite simple. And then people could comment on everything, and then we build like a shared knowledge database of somehow. So that's the important aspect, which I forgot to emphasize. So thank you, Max. All right, so speaking about the steps here, For the first one, context, it's specific to place and people. Of course, I think it's very important to understand why you are reforesting. And sometimes that's not trivial, like not the fact that you now have trees in a place where there wasn't trees before. It's not always a good thing. It depends on the biome, the community, what was happening there. So I think that's a very important step. And as it is there, like to get the buy-in from local communities and align long-term incentives is important as well. For the inception phase, it's like you need to identify the restoration sites. You get inspiration of local ecopreneurs, farmers, and communities, knowledge of tree planting practices, scoping of the activity focus is going to be agroforestry, nature restoration, estimation of commercial potential of the project, and should this project happen or not, is it going to be feasible. Then you go into funding, which you need to understand, like, what is the project developer that's going to be developing the project, what are the negotiation terms. You need to gather the initial funding to develop the first sites, and then also project at least the growth funding that helps the projects to scale and add additional sites, for example. Then you go into planning, conducting stakeholder consultation, development of the project design document, the famous PDD, selection of species of plants that are going to be planted. That's quite important as well. And then if the plan is to bring revenue from carbon markets, which is not a rule here, you also need to be making sure you secure land ownership. You have the proper documents. That's a big thing to prove you're the owner of the land, or the person is participating in the project. You initiate the validation certification process, which is quite long. We're going to talk more about this, and get some early community involvement. Then for certification, you have to pick one method or what verification body and what method of verification you're going to use for each verification body. There are a few different ones, and start going through the verification process. For materials, then you need to set up nurseries, banking local tree seeds, and growing seeds into saplings. Like it is there, it depends on the tree species, but it can take up to a year from seed to sapling. Then for planting, you have to prepare the land, earthwork, weeding, tree planting to coordinate the efforts on tree planting, documentation of the planting activities. That's going to be important later on if we're using carbon credits or some other sort of way to pay back. Also, on commercial activities of this step, auditing of planting site. Then you go into care protection against natural risks, animal grazing, pest fires. What can you do about it? Or against human intervention, especially cutting, and other risks like insurance, for example, you could work with. Then on management, the maintenance of planting site, reporting and monitoring of tree growth and health, tracking co-benefits, protection against illegal logging or unintended use. For MRV, monitor reporting and verification, you need to do regular reports and audits. For commercial activities, auditing of planting site, issuing carbon credits, harvesting wood, collecting produce. And then on the last phase, then you have for the step communication to donors, decision of usage of funds for community benefits, stable long-term incentives structures, payments for ecosystem services. That's something that can happen on the side. It's kind of like it's a different process. So you could do the carbon crediting, but you could also work with the payments for ecosystem services. So it goes through some sort of similar process to carbon credits, but much more simplified in a way, but complex in other ways. And then you also have the sale of the certificates for repayment of loans. All right, so this is what we have here. So the first question I have for you all is, what feels unclear about the reforestation value chain? What questions do you have? Please raise your hands or send in the chat.
André, I have a question, if possible.
Yes, please.
Based on your research, not just of the needs, but also of the space the startups occupying across the different spaces across the value chain, do you see a white space that maybe should demand more attention, an opportunity to digitalize a certain part? I'm aware that a lot of activity is going on remote sensing, but maybe there are other areas of the value chain that you feel are underserved. Could you shine a light on any of those points and explain a bit more?
Yeah, I think, Alex, if we could talk about this on the last section, because I'm going to talk about like the pain points and opportunities, then
Great.
I think that would make more sense if you don't mind. But
Perfect.
thanks for asking. About everything I just read through, does that make sense to you all? Any questions? All right.
I have a question. Sorry, André.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Tudo bem?
Please. Tudo bem.
Estava só a pensar, sorry, in English. I was just thinking, sorry. So I was just wondering, how do you see, because I feel that reforestation is a very cyclic activity in a way. Maybe
It's
more
a
like
very what?
elliptical,
Sorry?
like a cyclic activity. It goes in cycles, but in a way it progresses. So it's kind of like a moving cycle. Like, do you see that that fits in this value chain, or do you see that as completely disentangled? So the things I do in my first year or until I start, I'm gonna repeat somehow, but maybe not exactly the same in the next years.
Could you give an example of something that is recurring?
Like planting, actually, selecting sites and planting, even sometimes in the same location. If your seedlings don't survive, if you want to make your forest denser, if you want to connect different areas, because you want to also think about ecosystem services like connectivity and so on.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's one of the downsides of having a very simple linear model. So maybe it's not the value chain eventually, but the value loop, or at least something that indicates that you go back. So I agree that there is there's benefit to adding that, but doesn't quite fit this linear sequence that we've put down initially.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great input, because as it is for many things, like you can, but this especially, you have to be paying attention and seeing what's happening on the ground, and then you might have to change your strategy if the planting is not working well, or if it is working well, and you still have to keep planting, and maybe different species of plants, they coming at different times, right? So I totally agree. linear process is probably not the best representation. Yeah. Thanks for adding that, Luisa. Then we have some questions here on the chat. Martin says, I feel certification is the trust building chain piece. Can you elaborate more on accessibility and accountability of the certification providers?
Maybe I can start that, but
yeah, go ahead. No,
yeah.
Go ahead, Max.
Okay, well, so I think neither of us is an expert on any of the established certification bodies, and I think, but we're also aware that people are not happy with the way that Vera and Gold Standard make this process quite or resource consuming, both time, money, and obviously there are developments of lowering the barriers so that this can be done for smaller plots of land, and with maybe less presence by external auditors on the ground. So obviously there are efforts to do that. That model is not meant to be the to replace or compete with what established certification bodies have done. It's basically just to look at the process in a more holistic in a more holistic fashion. And if you want to document all of this in great detail, which you will have to in the project design document, obviously whatever certification body you will be working with will pose additional requirements, and there the devil is often in the details. So there's lots of controversy around selecting baselines or selecting the precise area that is being assessed, especially when it comes to credits for avoided deforestation. But we're purposefully just looking at reforestation as an umbrella term for activities that increase the numbers of trees that are growing in a certain area.
Yeah, we're also going to talk more about this on the pain points. That's certainly a pain point in the market right now. So we'll go back to this, and probably like last question for this part here from Jennifer. For species selection, how involved is the process? Do you consider succession species, neighborhood effects, keystone species, habitat, etc.? Yeah, actually, I don't know how to answer to this.
I can say a word. Yeah, so with my limited insights at Ecosia, and again, this is not endorsed by Ecosia, so it's some knowledge I gained, and it's hopefully will be also published by Ecosia. So Ecosia has a great blog that I would recommend you to check out, where they document their specific approach to financing reforestation. And some of the things they do is that they look at red listed species, and to make sure that you don't plant too many foreign species in a given area. In many, well, from a commercial perspective, there is obviously an incentive to keep it simple. Yeah, so if you can get lots of trees of one species for very little cost, then that lends itself to planting monocultures, eucalyptus monocultures, for example. So that's definitely something to look out for, and to at least limit the amount of foreign species. And from some other conversations with actually German startups, I know that the process of actually compiling the recipes, so what seeds do you put in for very specific piece of land, can get very complex. You need to know the area quite well. So this is again where you go down from abstraction to really practical, or to the specifics. and you need to pick those. Also looking at climate conditions going forward, changing climate conditions most importantly. So in Germany, there are many areas where trees have actually died due to changing climate conditions. And so if you just plant the same things again, the same thing will happen. And you need to be wise about the choice of seedlings, and also know what amount of aftercare is needed. So how long they need until they, for example, grow to a level where they can sustain themselves without the risk of being eaten by animals. So that's another factor impacting the selection of the tree species.
Yeah,
can I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, in another life, I used to do environmental work in like ecosystem restoration, and I think one of the things that distinction that I kind of feel is happening, there is both like reforestation as a business practice is what I'm hearing, and also reforestation as ecosystem restoring, and I feel like those are two different things, and depending on your intention and your later outcome. If you're growing a forest for mining or for logging, let's say, you will have a very different process of how you enter that process. Or if you are restoring a forest habitat to either meet certain cultural or historical for those kind of like reasoning, then different species and different plants and different beings are going to have to be considered in that process. And it's the same thing for the cycle. If you're creating for logging and to be part of that industry, then that cycle of how much human labor in that time scale is very different than if you're restoring a forest to its historical value, historical point in the time that is where that cycle, those cycles, the timing of each cycle then can also depends. And I think, if I am not misunderstanding, for the context of this is reforestation for economic purpose. Is that true, Andre?
No, I think we split it in two different parts. That's why there's like even like the first part on context, we have like why you want to do this reforestation, and then we try to separate the activities there under reforestation value chain for the ones that are more specific to commercial activities. But that's all very important for sure. Just to go quickly on, I think, two questions below, if I hope I'm not missing here. Otherwise, I'll go back to it later or after this meeting. But it's asking about different types of trees may capture different quantities of carbon, and that impacting the carbon crediting part. As far as I'm aware, part of this process of verification, that changes from body to body. Verification body is to actually build the inventory. And then on that part, I think it's calculated. I don't know about the details of it, but the idea is that you know, or you have an average or an estimation of how much that forest can capture of carbon. So I think that's put into account. But that changes a lot between different verification process. So again, like I'll make sure like this last questions that are left unanswered are answered after these meetings, but just so we have time to go through all we have here. Just gonna go to the findings of the research so far. And at this stage, feel free to like raise your hand if you want to comment or send comments on the chat. No need to wait for me to go to the next one or to finish all the findings. So these again, like this came from my conversation with those different experts. Though these are like very high level, but I think like some of them came up time and time again. So for me, it feels like it's like most of the experts agree those things are really problems that need to be looked at. So I'm gonna go back to the Notion file. And this is the table where we're listing all of them. I might not go through all of them right now. I'm gonna probably pick like the ones that showed up the most. So in the funding part, something that they all agree is that reforestation projects are quite expensive, which makes it hard to receive enough funding to proceed, between 6,000 to 8,000 USD per hectare. At least in Brazil. This came from interviews with Carolina from Carbon X and Lucas from Iniciativa Verde. Elias also mentioned that if carbon credits are used to fund the project, it would need to be sold for 30 to 60 USD per ton to make it work, or 60 to 100 if we're talking about the cost of competing with the value of timber. He also mentioned that you end up needing most of the time to do some timber harvesting beyond what's helpful to increase tree growth to make it work. Osvaldo from Iniciativa Verde said on the same, speaking about opportunity cost, which is important, that this should be considered, and this cost here up here doesn't consider that. What this means is that like if you have like cattle ranching happening in this piece of land, and then you're gonna remove that and just plant trees everywhere, then you're not receiving the revenue we're having with the cattle ranch. So this needs to be put into account if we want to convince anyone to do the reforestation project. So it's important to understand what's, again, about the context part, what's happening on the land right now. And it's really hard to get funders on board for a project that takes 10 to 20 years to give returns. Yeah, so this is a big thing. I have to say that Maya Climate, which is like a company that I worked with, they help those initial fundings. So they have investors on their marketplace that are willing to work with the project developers to invest before you actually have the project happening. But I'm sure there are many other, not sure if many, but there might be other solutions on the market looking at this. But again, this process is really expensive, and this is not necessarily considering like this 6 to 8K here, the costs for actually developing the project with the main verifiers, which are quite expensive. So this is a big one. Then in Brazil, there's a big challenge of providing land ownership for the planning part. So Diego from BR Carbon said it's quite common for the land in the Amazon to be like invaded land. Lucas from Iniciativa Verde said that many times it's used, they use false or incomplete documents, which we call here in Brazil grilagem. Then he talks about that's possible to do projects on public land as well, but the thing is that this is a very complicated topic, especially in Brazil. I don't know in other parts of the world, but like basically how he puts here, like it's not necessarily they're gonna have, the owner of the land is gonna have the usual documents you have for like a piece of land in an urban area, for example, or whatever. That's the analogous to it. And sometimes that land was acquired in a not legal way, or in a way that makes it hard to have a proper documentation, and that certainly impacts on the development of the process of the project. So this is a big one with lots of people I spoke with in Brazil said about the same thing. Again, especially in the Amazon. Also, like I forgot to mention that for every one of those pain points, I created questions to be answered. So like this one has a follow-up question: what are the specific challenges of providing land ownership in Brazil? And then I researched on top of this and found some very interesting documents that talk about like different problems that show up regarding this. I'm not gonna go through it, but when we share it, then you guys could look it up. And then here's to understand the availability of the land that can be reforested. I'm not sure if I was gonna mention this on the previous one, but there's I don't have this data here, but I've seen a couple different places that, again, in the Amazon, there are lots of lands that are like abundant. So in the legal process of like burning trees, not every, I think it's a big chunk, close to like 50% of the land, most of the time doesn't get used after all. So that's probably like a good part of the land that could be reforested around the Amazon looks like that. It's just like abundant land. There's no forest. There's nothing there, which is quite sad as well. Let me just check. Like, so yeah. So
Andre,
go ahead.
Maybe one suggestion so that we can cover a bit more ground is to go through the entire list at a higher pace, and then gather some feedback and questions from the audience.
Sure. Yeah, we could do that. Let me just mention this last piece here about, like, for example, because I think it shows quite well the question part to be answered. So for this pain point of like being expensive, there's another question here, which is like to really understand which reforestation steps and phases are the most expensive ones. So this is still to be researched about. Yeah, I'll go through all of them, and then we can select a few to talk in more detail. So this one is that everyone relies on the top 4 verification bodies to emit and validate their credits, which are expensive and slow, 12 to 36 months. And to be worth validating through these main verifiers, land has to be above 1,000 or 1,500 hectares for reforestation projects. We were talking about this before. There are tons of carbon projects validated by the main verification bodies that don't generate nearly the impact they allege they do and are verified for. So probably if you guys have seen the John Oliver show, it talks in a stretched way about it. There isn't a good availability of native tree seeds. There isn't well-developed research on how to successfully plant native trees, lacks investment, especially in the academy. So reforestation projects end up relying more on exotic trees as monoculture, as we were talking about before, which have much less biodiversity impact. There is a legislation in Brazil to protect forests in private lands, which is called Código Florestal, but it's not fully implemented and it's hard to monitor. In the Amazon states, for example, 80% of the land has to be forest. In other states, that number gets down to 20%. Then there are a few here that even came from Luisa. So about MRV, so knowing what options of MRVs are available, which ones are more recommended for each specific MRV goal. That's not trivial. Then accessing available MRV solutions is not a simple process. Price for MRV is usually too high for smaller projects. It's hard to know what are the usual workflows to deal with MRV data. Dealing with competing vegetation is one of the biggest challenges during the project's tree growth. Some of the most valuable trees in the ecosystem are shade-tolerant trees. They're designed to grow in forests that are already grown, which makes it hard to grow them in cow pastures, for example. And also that it's hard to quantify for ecosystem services in general and who should be paying for that. Yeah, so those are all of them. So I'm not sure if we should keep deep diving on the main ones or talk about the ones you guys are interested about.
What I would be interested in is if anyone sees things that are not mentioned here, or maybe has some good news around some of those pain points. So the idea, obviously, is you have the value chain, you have different steps in the value chain, things don't work. Hopefully governments, but more often private sector companies come in and start solving those problems. So each of the problems here is a potential ground to establish a business or for governments to step up, and ideally many sectors working together to resolve those. So
yeah. If someone has raised their hands, who is that? Misha, you wanna? I just saw you send a message here on the chat. Feel free to.
Yeah. But that's not what I was going to ask.
Okay.
So thanks for this. Like, this is great. I'd love to get access to the Notion. Maybe contribute some more information. The thing that I wanted to kind of point out in my own research into carbon markets for reforestation opportunities is that the market is a total mess. It's a complete disaster. And, you know, from many different points of view, but especially from like price discovery, price transparency, all of that stuff. But the thing that I found that's really interesting is that a lot of corporates and other net zero committed organizations are really not paying a lot of attention to the registries. And everything is about relationships. So if you can if you have a reforestation project and you have a good relationship with a company that wants to offset a whole bunch of tons, like they may not even care about, you know, you being on a registry. Now, they may not care for good reasons or for bad reasons. They may not care for the bad reason because they just want to buy cheap tons and put it in their annual report and make everything sound great, right? They may not care about registries also for good reasons, in the sense that the registries also suck. And and they say, like, they're just not, I've talked to corporates who said, like, it's not rigorous enough. Like, we can't estimate, you know, impact from looking at what Vera or Gold Standard does. So they have their own in-house teams with scientists that kind of do their own due diligence, or they will outsource to a third party, that does this sort of work, and they won't list anything on Vera or Gold Standard or anything like that. And I think that I can't give you like, specific numbers in terms of like how much of this kind of bilateral, transaction goes on, but I think there's a lot of that goes on. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at, the price per ton for nature-based solutions, you're not really getting a very good indication of what actually is going on in the marketplace.
Yeah, I hope it goes more towards that, actually. So I think that's just a good, and thanks for adding that. I think it's a good point to mention then more details about this piece here. So there are tons of carbon projects validated by the main verification bodies that don't generate nearly the impact they allege they do, and they're verified for. We have this paper that Elias Renoster shares all the time about estimated that up to 72% of Vera carbon credits may not be genuine offsets, have a low likelihood of environmental integrity. And this is a big discussion on the market. I heard about both sides, but I'm biased because I'm working with Elias Renoster. They have some they have lots of critics about this. So the way I see, this is not Elias' opinion, but the way that I've learned about this is that like this main verifiers, they ask for lots of things. So one thing he suggested me, and I suggest you guys doing it for interest, is to go to various websites and download a PDD and look through it. And I was reading through one of them, and you can see like there's lots of information there that doesn't, I mean, those documents are like 200 to 500 pages, and there are lots of information that they're not directly correlated with additionality of the project, if the project is actually creating impact. There was some that was even like saying the details of like how they were arranging a meeting to talk about the project or something like that. And that makes this process, that's one of the things that makes this process very hard for anyone to do, because you have to put lots of details, but they are not necessarily the information that's going to be helpful to actually do a good project. So there are lots of critics on this side, but at the same time, you know, I don't know, the other side's going to say that they're doing something at least about it. They're like making the market or companies get this habit, or not sure, for lack of a better word, like investing in projects and giving awareness, bringing awareness to it. But anyways, we can talk lots about this. So not sure if anyone has anything to add or ask about this.
If not, I can maybe contribute a little bit from projects that I'm involved with around remote sensing. Maybe André, can you go back to the why are we stuck, like the main overview, to the MRV part? So yes, so I'm not an expert on remote sensing, but I've worked with satellite data and machine learning algorithms on top of them, and I think the closer you get to it in practice, the more nuanced you need to look at what is possible and what is not possible. So, and also how much it will cost to come to certain conclusions based on satellite data. So there are the free satellite missions from the European Space Agency, the Sentinel-1 and 2 missions, the Landsat, from the United States, and obviously there's also Planet with the NICV program in the tropics, which is nice, but then they have different levels of resolution, and especially if you plant trees in areas where you already have green biomass, it's very unlikely you will see them in the first couple of years. So maybe as a kind of a tidbit of background on the satellites, I think it's actually not permitted to provide data with a higher resolution than 23 or 25 centimeters per pixel. Both because it can be technically challenging, but also for, I think for national security reasons, this data is simply not accessible. And so you can imagine that some things you will simply not see on a satellite image for a couple of years. So that's one thing. And then also, if you involve techniques like radar, so the Sentinel-1 mission, where you try to infer tree height and how it has changed over time, those have quite a bit of variability in and of themselves. And so there is a lot of statistical uncertainty. So you will be able to make some statements, but it's by no means a black or white statement like the trees have grown or the trees have all died. And so you're dealing with statistics and obviously we all know how you can also fool yourselves and by extension others with statistics, and so that's definitely something to look out for. And what I've learned from like spending roughly now 2 years working with satellite data, both for reforestation but also in other contexts, is that you need to ask very precise questions, or try to get to very precise questions to begin with, and then do some and then speak to some experts to assess whether it's realistic to even get to a satisfactory answer by involving this still quite complex machinery of obtaining the data, sometimes correcting it for all kinds of artifacts, and then coming to your statistics. So in principle, there's definitely a lot of value, and I'm hopeful, but the devil is definitely in the detail, and you it's not straightforward to make all kinds of assertions based on at least the freely available or the data around satellite imagery.
Yeah, I don't know if Luisa, you want to comment on this? It would be very nice to.
I can, although I just agree, generally speaking. This is also not my like Planet's official stance or anything. This is just my personal opinion. But from what I've been hearing and seeing, I feel that it's just a combination of technologies that's going to work, and that you can only do remote monitoring or scale monitoring to a certain extent. So there's not going to be a silver bullet on this, and it's always going to be a combination of field data, so people that go there, drones, and then eventually satellites. So maybe in the first 5 years, you have to do something more intensive on the ground. That's also when you probably need to monitor your small seedlings a bit more. So probably not so bad that you go there more often. And once you have trees with a proper canopy, then you can start moving on to more remote kind of technologies. That could be a combination of drone and satellites, or just satellites. But it is a long-term project to reforest anyway. So I think you also have to think long-term on the technologies that you're going to use and adapt to the different stages of your growing ecosystem in a way.
Very good. Thanks for adding that, Luisa. Just quick comment, Misha. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You asked about what was it? Terraformation. No, actually, I have not. Even though I'm aware of the acceleration project they have, I think their technology, or at least their value proposition, is really interesting, because also from what that's quite common ground. Like, it's clear that we need more projects. Elias says that like we have 500 projects worldwide, forestry projects. We need like 5 million. So for certain, like we need to, and that goes like much beyond developing. I think Max was talking about this, like financial solutions like NFTs and all the blockchain stuff, which is they're not really helping with the having more projects on the ground. So I like the work they're doing. If you know anyone there and can connect us, that would be very nice.
Yeah, I can connect you guys. Yeah, I think they just closed the application for this accelerator. So, they were putting out a call for reforestation projects all around the world that they could then, take their seed banking technology and some of their other expertise and begin leveraging it with other folks. But yeah, let's take the conversation offline, and I can try to hook you guys up.
Awesome, thank you. Frederick, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for the presentation. I came in late, but the gist is very, very on point with COP15, which is starting today officially in my hometown of Montreal, where the biodiversity framework is being discussed, which is what I put in the chat. And these types of tools are key if we are to create an accountability framework within the global biodiversity framework. And I hope that all of the negotiators, the US is not a party to it, but the rest of the world is aware of this at the highest levels, because my observation of the talks, pre-talks so far, is that everyone wants to make sure we build in the accountability part, not what would happen in Copenhagen and not what happened in Paris, where we have these wonderful targets that we miss because accountability is hard. But with technology now, we're able, hopefully, to get governments to not hide behind fudging numbers. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's very important. In Brazil, I think it speaks with what you were talking about. We had a big problem with the current government that's about to leave, right? Because like there were, actually, I didn't know that, but Elias told me like Brazil has a very great technology in terms of remote sensing tech. And like the deforestation was, because I was wondering, like with all this remote technology, like do we know when deforestation is happening and what levels? And actually we knew, but like if I'm not mistaken, the first year of the government, Bolsonaro actually fired the guy one of the guys that was responsible for reporting those numbers. So
not surprising, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If everyone's seen it, Lula has proposed that all the rainforest countries, so Brazil, West Africa, Congo, Gabon, DRC, and Indonesia get together to create a way to protect the tropical rainforest, because that's key for biodiversity and climate change.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for that. I hope that turns into action. But I agree with you. Yeah, technology has a great role in helping us identify that and bringing accountability, as we were saying. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's see, we have like a few more minutes. I can talk about if anyone wants to add anything. Otherwise, I will talk about one of the more details about one of the pain points here. Or if you want to hear specifically about one of them, please let me know. I think we talked about this one. Yeah, but this is it's an important one. So beyond like the current verification bodies, like the projects are not necessarily they don't necessarily have the impact they allege to. It's also, we talked a bit about it. It's a very expensive and slow process. It takes like 12 to 36 months on average to get a project off the ground, actually verified. And it can cost between, like, depending on the size and the type of project, like millions of dollars to go through this process, which goes even beyond the costs of reforestation. I mean, adding up both costs actually. And this is a huge problem. So one of the solutions that it's already, so there are a few solutions about this, but they are not like, I don't know if they just didn't get awareness enough. So like I was saying before, payment for ecosystem services is an alternative. There are a few different options in Brazil as well for ways to receive payments for that are not necessarily payment for ecosystem services for projects. And I think it was Misha that was saying about like I know a few project developers there's that model like plant a tree where they sell directly to companies. Jundu.earth, which is a company I'm freelancing for, is trying to do an alternative method of verification using more like remote sensing data, because that's another thing that I've learned is that Vera process, for example, is not only bureaucratic, but they use like a very manual process. They have to go in the ground and actually to do the inventory and to verify the project. So that makes things quite expensive. But I've seen they're also doing like an MVP, a pilot with Pachama. So I don't know that's how that's gonna turn out. But this is a huge problem because disagreeing a little bit with what Misha said, lots of companies still rely on the verification from those named verifiers, and that's a problem at the same time, because like if you're a small landowner, it's very hard to get a project happening. So we certainly need more solutions that help with this, and this could unlock those millions of projects that we need. So here I linked like what are the process of validating through the top 4 and what are the steps needed for certification. Someone asked this in the beginning, so I linked here some resources that can help understand this. I'm also doing a course on on how to develop carbon credits for those main verifiers, because I'm interested to know how this works. So probably we'll have more information about this in the coming months. Now, I don't want to miss Alex's question that he raised before we finish here. You're asking about like where are the main opportunities. I don't know if what we talked about answered this a little bit, Alex, but feel free to redo the question if you want.
It was really just underserved parts of the value chain where you think more digitalization can have an impact. There is lots of activity in remote sensing, but earlier on in the value chain, perhaps kind of business planning, using biodiversity data to choose species and project revenue forecasts, and as an example, seed banks. Just there are some parts of the value chain that maybe have received less attention historically, and it'd be interesting to understand where you would put the spotlight, given there are a lot of digitally minded people on this call.
Yeah. I have a few ideas that are not that much validated. So by now, there's a number of apps that are being used by companies like Ecosia. There's another quite well-known NGO called Taking Root. They have their own app where you actually report what you do on the ground. And obviously, I mean, they're being used, and I think Ecosia has by now registered more than 160 million trees. I'm not sure how many Taking Root is planting. And that, by the way, that is also a problem of communication, that it's not really about how many trees you put into the ground, but rather how many actually survive after some time. And that's a lot more interesting statistic. And eventually, it's not only about the trees, but intact ecosystems, but that's just as a side note. So those apps, when you look into the details, they also face some challenges with registering the precise location of trees, being able to really go back to that spot and find that tree. So that there's definitely more development needed in that direction. Another area that I foresee is around enabling this whole process of setting up operations, organizing people, sequencing activities. I mean, that's dozens or potentially hundreds of people that will be involved in those kinds of in those kinds of activities. So from a project management perspective, there's definitely something to do. I think you've mentioned species selection, so there's definitely a lot of room to combine global climate scenarios with local conditions and with also what is actually available, because in many cases you have to compromise, or it's not that you because of different constraints you can't get what would be ideal. So there's room around that. I was also hoping to get more ideas from this group and people in the future coming to this document to actually note down precisely those insights and those needs, because I think this is really where where innovation can benefit those project developers. And with all of the resources going into things like 10 minutes deliveries that I see here in Berlin, I would rather have more entrepreneurial energy looking at how to bring healthier forests back to this planet. So also appreciate any suggestions you have around the earlier stages of the value chain.
For sure, I agree. And probably like I see people talking on the chat about like native trees, and speaking a little bit to what Alex asked. There's this pain point about there isn't a good availability of native tree seeds. I don't have lots of details about this, but I think it's worth mentioning that the problem is that the seed has to be planted in its own origin area. In the Amazon, there isn't a good infrastructure for distribution of seeds. That's something Terraformation is I think is trying to help with as well, but there's lots of room to help with this. And I think that specifically they have like an app to track what trees are sources of seeds in the region, and they have to for somehow like create the logistics or the network for that to go into nurseries. So there's some technology that could help with this. And just to add, teacher Marcel comment here, in the Amazon, there isn't consolidated protocols in place to identify the areas of seed production. And also, it is difficult to do the logistics of it. And there isn't a network of Amazon seeds well structured. So just to mention another one in more detail.
Maybe to end on time, I think now would probably be good to think to speak about how we can incorporate feedback from this group into the Notion doc.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I was gonna talk about this. So John asked if it's public. Not yet, but it will be soon. So the idea is actually, so two things. One is that I will rewatch this session here and try to like do the note taking for all the comments that were made. And if some make sense to be added to these documents, I'll ask you first before putting up, and if you're comfortable with it, I can put it up. And then I don't want to promise anything, but the idea is that in the next couple of weeks, we should open this to the public so everyone can comment on it, check it out, or add new inputs. I thought that was worth sharing with you all that participated in this call, even first to MVP this idea of sharing the document, you guys adding comments and things like that. So I will ask for the emails if that's possible, and make sure that happens. So yeah.
Is it possible for people, are you okay with people to reach out to you? Because I think everyone here is in Work on Climate. They can reach out to you on
sure.
on DM, on Slack.
Yeah, for sure. please feel free to, I'll send my LinkedIn profile here. If you guys haven't yet found me, so feel free to connect through Work on Climate Slack or LinkedIn. And let's stay in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Bless you.
Thank you.